So, you probably recognize this if you've been watching SW Dweeb's videos. This is a SW Dweeb style pattern wrapper that I cast using 3D patterns off his web store. Patterns were great. I did repin them. Just I'd like to do mine a little bit differently than how he had it set up, but that was easy, and I do enjoy making patterns by hand, so that was kind of the fun part anyway. I've actually already made 8 of these, including this one, but that's another story. Now it seems I might have reason to cast more of them, but to make that possible, at least feasible and a lot less work, I decided I'm going to make a match plate so I can cast 2 at a time in a pretty small mold. I'm going to explain how I laid this out on my molding board so that everything would fit right. First I set the flask on the board, the 12 by 12 inch flask that I wanted to cast the match plate in. I traced the inside perimeter of it, found a center, drew center lines on both sides, and then I figured out, the minimum amount of clearance I wanted from the edge of the flask to the edge of the spacer for the match plate. Right? If you've seen my one of my other videos where I cast a match plate before, you understand that I use a spacer like this made of drywall in between the cope and drag to make a space that the metal can fill up, and that's where that's the actual plate for the match plate pattern. It'll all make sense later. If you missed my other video, I don't blame you. It was like 40 minutes long. Anyway, so I've got minimum clearance. I want to have at least this much sand bearing down on the drywall. Then I have the thickness of the flask wall that I'm going to cast, that I'm going to use the match plate with. It's 3/4 inch thick lumber. And then I've centered my 2 patterns in the middle of those walls with enough space from the edge of them to give clearance, so there won't be too much chance of a run out. Got enough room for a runner in between. So that's how I laid it all out. It's just a bunch of measuring and drawing lines and stuff. So if it all works out, I should be able to make 2 of these at a time in less than the time that it takes to make this mold, because I won't have to cut gating and do various other things. I only have the one pattern, so when I do it, I'm going to be coping down on this one to get the mold made, which takes a lot more time than ramming up a split pattern, but not as much more time as printing a second pattern. Now, the reason that I laid this all out like this, instead of just putting them in the middle of my drag and ramming it up the 12 by 12 mold, is because these have to be just the right space from the inner wall of the 12 by 12 flask to leave room for all these clearances. So I'm gonna use this as my molding board and ram it up with the patterns like right on these lines and the mold right on these lines. And the first step of ramming it up, I'm just going to kind of tuck down the sand by hand before I start ramming to kind of lock them in place and keep anything from shifting around, because if these patterns move around while I'm ramming it up, the whole thing's not going to work. Well, I lost the audio from the molding footage. I'm going to have to do a little bit of a voiceover here to make up for it. So hopefully I'll be able to somehow seam this together in editing. Hooray. Anyway, 1, 2, 3, and play. So here I'm laying out the patterns on the molding board as I described. using my markings from before. There goes the flask. This is going to be like, probably I'm going to be talking way too much here. I got that riddle with a whole bunch of other gear that I have a long overdue video coming up one day. It's been a couple years in the making. Bunch of new toys that you guys haven't seen unless you're on the casting forums. Alright. So I've locked the patterns into place by tucking them in by hand there off the riddled sand. Now I'm just topping it up. Very important that those patterns don't move. I had the chest cam on, so I was playing around with the angles at first, trying to figure out what works. Skipped over a whole bunch of stuff here. Just, you've all seen me pound sand before. If it's your first time, then congratulations. I'm going to keep this one reasonably short, like more like 20 minutes than 40, hopefully. I probably could have just used the butt end and pounded this down flat now, but an extra pass with the peen doesn't hurt. You might have just seen an SW dweeb style ramming tool there if you were watching closely, and this strike as well comes from Perry's Patterns. His 3D files are cheap, right? I think they were like $3 each or something when I got mine. That was, mind you, that was about a year ago. I haven't been to his site very recently, but yeah. Alright, now we got the drag round up. Layer parting just to kind of keep any loose sand that gets moved around during this part from sticking to the rest of the mold. Just cutting down to the parting line here. This took quite a while. I tried to just give you the highlights. You get the idea though. You've seen coping down before in other videos, I'm sure. Okay. This parting kind of highlights some of the the little crack at the edge of the thing is too steep, then the sand's going to break off, so I look for spots that are hard to brush out and then cut them down a little less steep. This is just getting some loose grains out of there that are going to break off anyway. The bit of parting on the brush makes it easy that I use the brush to smooth down the sand without tearing out sand. It's kind of a lubricating effect on the bristles. Yeah, I had the spacer turned 90 degrees here, but it's good enough. The sprues maybe just a little. The sprue might end up being like right where the flask, the smaller flask is going to have to be, which means I might need to do some grinding and Bondo to get that flattened out. finally found a way to get the whole plug of sand to come out with the pouring basin cutter, and here it is. Ram it down a little bit. I saw this on Sand Rammer's video. It's genius. It never used to come out in one piece before. Almost never. Just cleaning it out. Getting that ridge right. Breaking those edges. And getting that radius. I have several different little brushes I like to use for doing this kind of thing. A few different sizes, and breaking that little corner there too. A lot of this, it's easier to blow this stuff out of here after it's up on its side before I close the mold. So. A little bit of, it's going to be a little bit of flashing maybe, but you know, there's always a little bit. Pulling out the sprue, any crumbly edges. There we go. Clean out that basin. And here's the runner. I do have an air blower that's a little easier to use than that hand one, but it's, my compressor's kind of on the outs right now. My little bike pump one is a switch that doesn't always turn on, and it's packed away, so. And out it comes. There we go. Now I don't have a way to use a screw to draw this one out, so. And I don't have any of that, what is it, duct seal stuff that the Navy guys talk about. They call it monkey poop for, I guess it's just something sticky that you can grab onto to pull them out. But as you see, I just dumped it out and it didn't damage the edges of the cavity, so I got lucky. I dusted the drag there because there's always the possibility that doing this I'll get some loose sand into it, and I didn't want it to stick. I figured I'd just cut two gates that go right across from one part to the other across the runner, one at each end. I mean, when I cast the 8 other ones, they only need one gate each, but whatever. Belt and suspenders, I guess. Break those edges. I hope my rambling isn't too annoying. Or, whatever. Okay, and now we place the spacer. I'm just making sure that this is nicely centered. The fisheye lens on the camera makes it look like this side is farther from the cavity than it is, but it's pretty well centered up. Good enough, I think. Time to put the cup on, and then it is ready to pour. And there we have it. You see the little gap between the cope and drag? That's how thick the plate's going to be. spacer out of here without making a mess first. Looks pretty good. I'll let it cool off a little bit. I'll brush it off and we'll come back for another look. So here it is with most of the sand brushed off it. It came out pretty nice. These things are reasonably nice and smooth. I can always sand them a little if I really wanted to, as long as I don't touch the plate itself. But that's more work, and I think it should work fine as is, so I probably won't. The parting line looks okay, at least on this. I mean, there's no breakout, so the runner looks like it has draft everywhere it needs to, so it shouldn't tear out any sand when I go to demold this thing. There might be some little places for sand to break off in there, but it's no more than would happen if I was molding the loose patterns, I'm pretty sure. So what is left to do is got to saw this nub off, saw off the sprue. I got to build the flasks to fit these. I'm probably going to build, a few of them so I can ram up a few molds in a short amount of time and pour half a dozen or more of these parts off one crucible. Once I have those flasks built, I'll have to drill out holes for the alignment pins, which will just be a matter of marking it out and getting it on the drill press. And then I will use those holes as guides to drill out the alignment pin holes in the flasks. At least that's the plan. Maybe I'll do another video about building those flasks, finishing this match plate, and pouring castings. I'll try and find time. I got tons of footage from the last couple of years that's just sitting there on my hard drive. But more on that later.